The sun was just beginning to rise over Los Angeles International Airport, bathing the glass terminals in a soft golden hue. Business travelers rushed with coffee cups and rolling suitcases. Flight attendants stood in neat lines at boarding gates, and the usual morning chaos buzzed through the air. Among the crowd, a young woman named Evelyn Monroe walked calmly, dressed in jeans, sneakers, and a simple gray hoodie. Nothing about her appearance suggested that she was the owner and CEO of Monroe Air, one of the fastest-growing airlines in the United States. She looked like any other passenger, maybe a college student flying home or a freelancer on a weekend trip. And that was exactly how she wanted it. Evelyn had built her empire from the ground up, starting with one leased aircraft and a dream to make air travel affordable, comfortable, and kind. Within 6 years, Monroe Air had become a household name, praised for its hospitality and efficiency. But Evelyn never let success get to her head. She preferred to see things from the ground, just like the people who trusted her airline every day. That morning, she was flying from Los Angeles to New York for a quiet weekend before a major conference. She had reserved a business class seat, 3A, but she didn't use her influence or name when booking. She wanted to experience her own airline the way any normal traveler would. As she reached the check-in counter, she smiled at the airline staff member and handed over her ID. The attendant scanned her name, blinked, and looked up quickly. "Ms. Monroe?" she stammered. Evelyn raised a finger to her lips and smiled softly. "Please, just Evelyn today." The woman smiled nervously and nodded. "Of course, ma'am." "Welcome aboard." Evelyn appreciated the respect, but didn't want special treatment. She declined an automatic upgrade to first class and chose to stay in business, wanting to observe how her crew treated passengers firsthand. It wasn't unusual for her to do surprise inspections, but not as a boss. As a customer. After clearing security, she walked toward gate 47, carrying nothing but a leather tote bag and a paperback novel. Her flight, Monroe Air Flight 204, was boarding in 15 minutes. Around her, people jostled for position in line, their faces a mix of exhaustion and impatience. She took a seat by the window, watching one of her aircraft being refueled. The Monroe Air logo gleamed proudly on the tail, a silver eagle soaring above a blue horizon. She smiled. Still feels surreal, she thought. A boarding announcement echoed through the terminal. "Ladies and gentlemen, we will begin pre-boarding shortly for Flight 204 to New York City." Evelyn waited until her group was called. She never cut lines, never pulled rank. When her turn came, she walked up quietly. The gate agent scanned her ticket and greeted her with a respectful nod. "Welcome aboard, Miss Monroe," the agent whispered. Evelyn returned a small smile and stepped down the jet bridge. Inside the aircraft, a scent of coffee and lemon polish filled the air. The cabin was warm, softly lit, and calm, exactly how she had instructed her teams to make passengers feel at home. A flight attendant greeted her cheerfully. "Good morning, ma'am. Seat 3A, right this way." "Thank you," Evelyn said, settling into her seat. The large window beside her framed the sunrise perfectly. She placed her tote under the seat, opened her book, and relaxed. Passengers continued boarding, couples, families, business travelers, typing furiously on laptops. The usual. Everything seemed peaceful. That is, until he arrived. A man in a tailored navy suit came striding down the aisle, phone pressed to his ear. His voice was loud enough for half the cabin to hear. "I told them to hold the plane if they have to. I don't do delays." He barked into his phone. He was tall, with slicked-back hair, shiny leather shoes, and an expensive watch that seemed to glint with arrogance. The crew's smiles wavered slightly as he approached. He ended his call abruptly, tossed his boarding pass into a flight attendant's hand, and said, "Business class, seat 3A. The attendant smiled politely. "Yes, sir, right this way." When he reached the third row, he stopped dead. Evelyn looked up from her book. "Excuse me," he said sharply. "You're in my seat." Evelyn blinked. "I'm sorry?" "My seat," he repeated, waving his ticket slightly in her face. "3A. You're sitting in it." Evelyn glanced at her own ticket. "That's strange," she said kindly. "Mine also says 3A." He gave a short, mocking laugh. "I think you must have misread it. Happens all the time. Maybe you're supposed to be in the back." The surrounding passengers began to take interest. The flight attendant leaned in to check both tickets. Her brow furrowed. "It seems there's a double booking." "I'm so sorry, sir. Ma'am, I'll sort this out." Evelyn smiled gently. "It's all right. Take your time." But the man wasn't having it. "I don't have time. I'm a platinum member. Fix it now." His tone carried authority, but not the kind earned through respect. The attendant hesitated, intimidated. "I'll just check with my supervisor," she said nervously. The man crossed his arms. "I don't see what's so hard about this. It's obvious she doesn't belong here." That sentence hit Evelyn like a quiet slap. She said nothing, only closed her book slowly. Around them, passengers began to whisper. A woman shook her head disapprovingly. A young man muttered, "Wow, what a jerk." The attendant returned moments later. "Sir, it appears both tickets were issued correctly. There must have been a system glitch. One of you will have to temporarily move until we can confirm which one." Before she could finish, the man cut in. "She move. I paid for this seat, and I'm not sitting anywhere else." The flight attendant looked helplessly at Evelyn. Evelyn inhaled softly, then smiled, calm as ever. "It's okay," she said. "I'll move to economy for now. You can resolve it later." The attendant's face flushed with guilt. "Ma'am, I'm so sorry." "It's fine," Evelyn interrupted gently. "Please don't worry." She gathered her tote bag, stood, and walked down the aisle without a trace of anger. Her steps were slow, measured, graceful. The man sat down triumphantly, adjusted his tie, and smirked as if he'd just won a small war. Evelyn found a middle seat in economy next to a young college student and an elderly lady knitting. The two smiled kindly as she settled in. "You handled that well," the older woman said softly. Evelyn smiled. "Thank you. Some things aren't worth arguing about." The student beside her opened his tablet, then froze. On the screen was an article titled, "The Young CEO Revolutionizing Air Travel, Evelyn Monroe of Monroe Air." He looked at the woman beside him, then at the photo in the article. The resemblance was undeniable. His eyes widened in disbelief. "Wait," he whispered. "You're—" Evelyn placed a finger to her lips, smiling playfully. "Let's keep that between us, okay?" The boy nodded, speechless. As the plane doors closed and the engines began to hum, Evelyn looked out the window. Clouds rolled across the horizon like waves. She sighed softly, not from anger, but from reflection. People show their true character when they think no one's watching, she thought. What she didn't know was that the man's arrogance had just set in motion an unforgettable lesson, one that the entire plane, and later the entire world, would never forget. The engines roared. Flight 204 lifted off the runway, climbing toward a sky that would soon witness a story of pride, humility, and poetic justice. The airplane hummed steadily as passengers continued to board. The aisles filled with the soft rustle of coats, the click of luggage wheels, and the occasional chatter of travelers finding their seats. Up front, Martin Keller sat proudly in seat 3A, the very spot he had taken from Evelyn Monroe only minutes earlier. His posture screamed entitlement, legs crossed, sunglasses still on, a faint smirk tugging at his lips. Martin was the kind of man who believed the world owed him convenience. Years in corporate law had inflated his ego, and his wealth had built a thick layer of arrogance around him. To him, kindness was weakness, and humility was for those who hadn't made it. He was used to getting what he wanted, and today was no exception, or so he thought. The flight attendant approached cautiously. "Mr. Keller, can I get you something to drink before takeoff?" He waved dismissively. "Sparkling water, room temperature. And make sure the glass is clean this time." "Yes, sir," she said politely, hiding her discomfort. Meanwhile, in economy, Evelyn adjusted her seatbelt, quietly observing the passengers around her. The boy beside her still couldn't believe who he was sitting next to, a woman whose name was on the plane's fuselage. "Do people treat you like that often?" he finally asked in a hushed tone. Evelyn smiled faintly. "Sometimes. But you learn more about people when they think you're nobody." The elderly lady next to her chimed in. "Sweetheart, I don't know who that man thinks he is, but his mother surely forgot to teach him manners." Evelyn chuckled softly. Maybe life will remind him. As boarding finished, the flight attendants closed the overhead bins and moved down the aisle for the final check. Evelyn watched them closely, how they smiled, how they handled passengers' requests. She mentally noted who seemed confident, who looked nervous. It was a habit she'd never broken, evaluating her team, not as their boss, but as a fellow traveler. Up front, Martin's complaints had already begun. "This seat doesn't recline enough," he grumbled to the attendant. "And the guy behind me keeps bumping my chair." The attendant nodded calmly. "I'm sorry, sir. I'll see what I can do." "I doubt you'll fix it," Martin muttered, loud enough for others to hear. "This airline needs better training." The words drifted down the aisle, and one of the attendants further back heard them. She exchanged a quick glance with another crew member. "Did he just say that about our airline?" she whispered. The two laughed quietly, shaking their heads. When the plane finally began to taxi, Evelyn felt the familiar hum of engines beneath her feet. Flying always brought her peace. Above the clouds, the noise of the world faded. No meetings, no phones, no pressure. Just stillness. She leaned back and closed her eyes, though the scene at the front of the plane replayed in her mind. She wasn't angry, just reflective. "He judged me without a second thought," she mused. "Maybe he'll learn something today." The boy beside her scrolled through his phone, then showed her a headline: "Monroe Air CEO to attend Women in Business Summit, New York City." The attached photo was unmistakably her. He whispered, "You're on your way to that, right?" She smiled. "Something like that." The elderly woman chuckled. If only that rude man knew who he kicked out of her seat. Evelyn laughed softly. "Oh, I think he'll find out soon enough." As the plane ascended, Martin ordered another drink, this time champagne. "Make it quick," he snapped when the attendant hesitated. "Yes, sir," she replied, masking irritation with professionalism. Half an hour into the flight, the cabin settled into calm. Movies flickered on seat screens, and the smell of coffee drifted through the air. Evelyn turned her attention to the in-flight magazine, the very one she'd approved months earlier. She flipped to a section titled, "Behind the Wings, Monroe Air's Vision for the Future." The first page featured a photograph of her smiling at a hangar, surrounded by employees. The headline read, "Evelyn Monroe, CEO and founder." She smiled faintly. The irony wasn't lost on her. Somewhere up front, the man who'd mocked her for not belonging was sipping champagne on her dime. In the galley, two flight attendants whispered, "Are you sure that's her?" One asked. "Yes," the other replied quietly. "I saw her at corporate training. That's Evelyn Monroe." Then why didn't she say anything when that man? Because she's different. You can tell she doesn't care about showing off. The purser overheard and nodded knowingly. We'll treat her with the respect she deserves. Let's not make a scene. But a scene was brewing whether they liked it or not. Just then, Martin pressed the call button again. Ding. The attendant appeared instantly. Yes, sir? This meal is cold, he said, frowning. And the bread is hard. Unacceptable. I'm sorry, sir. I'll get you another tray. You should have gotten it right the first time. She bit her tongue and walked away. Other passengers shifted uncomfortably. One man across the aisle whispered, Unbelievable. He's been complaining since we took off. Martin didn't care. He was proud of being demanding, proud of showing dominance in small, petty ways. He leaned back in his seat, glancing at his watch. Let's hope this disaster of an airline at least lands on time, he muttered. In economy, Evelyn overheard the faint echo of his words. The irony deepened. The student whispered, If I were you, I'd tell him who you are right now. Evelyn shook her head. That's not how lessons stick. People don't remember embarrassment. They remember humility. Her calmness impressed him. She spoke not like a powerful CEO, but like someone who had seen both sides of humanity, success and struggle, arrogance and kindness. The hours passed. The crew continued their duties, now more aware of who sat quietly in the back. They made sure Evelyn was comfortable, offering her tea, checking in discreetly, even apologizing once more for the earlier mix-up. Really, she said kindly, it's all fine. You're doing great. Thank you. The attendant smiled, touched by her warmth. She'd served thousands of passengers, but none had ever handled such humiliation with such grace. Meanwhile, Martin began to notice a shift. The attendants seemed distracted, their energy directed elsewhere. He assumed it was incompetence, never suspecting that their quiet attention was focused not on him, but on the woman he'd disrespected. As the flight entered smoother air, Evelyn stretched slightly and looked out the window. The clouds rolled endlessly, like a soft white ocean. Somewhere in that serenity, she found peace again. In the distance, thunderclouds flickered faintly, a hint of turbulence ahead. The captain's voice soon came through the speakers. Ladies and gentlemen, we'll be encountering a bit of rough air in about 10 minutes. Please fasten your seatbelts. The cabin murmured softly as passengers complied. Martin, however, clicked his tongue in irritation. Great. First the food, now this. Evelyn smiled faintly. Storms always come before calm, she thought. As the plane shuddered gently through the air, Martin gripped his armrest and muttered curses under his breath. The irony of a man who couldn't control his attitude trying to control the skies made Evelyn almost laugh. The turbulence passed. Calm returned. And in that calm, the first whisper began, a whisper that would travel through every row of that aircraft, changing everything by the time they landed in New York. One of the attendants leaned toward the purser and whispered, It's confirmed. Passenger in 17B, that's Evelyn Monroe herself. The purser's eyes widened slightly. The owner? Yes. The purser looked toward the front of the plane, where Martin Keller still sat smugly in her seat, completely unaware that his arrogance had placed him squarely in the middle of a story the internet would soon never forget. And back in row 17, Evelyn sipped her tea quietly, eyes closed, smiling at the gentle hum of the engines. Fate, she knew, had just taken off. The air inside the cabin felt thick with tension. Though the turbulence had passed, an uneasy silence hung in the front rows of business class. Martin Keller reclined smugly in seat 3A, sipping champagne as though the world owed him comfort. Every movement of his spoke of self-importance, the kind that drew eyes not out of admiration, but irritation. Behind him, Passengers whispered among themselves. Some had witnessed the earlier confrontation, and now eyed him with quiet disdain. The woman he'd rudely dismissed, Evelyn Monroe, was somewhere in economy, sitting humbly without complaint. But Martin, oblivious to the storm he'd brewed, scrolled lazily through his phone, smirking at his reflection in the screen. A flight attendant approached. "Mr. Keller, would you like another drink?" He didn't look up. "Finally, some proper service," he muttered. "Make it quick, and don't spill this time." The attendant's polite smile faltered. She turned briskly to fetch his order, her professionalism battling frustration. In her years of flying, she had met all kinds of nervous travelers, kind souls, tired parents, but rarely someone so unapologetically unpleasant. Down in row 17, Evelyn sat quietly with her tray table down, a cup of tea steaming in front of her. She had just finished reviewing notes for an upcoming speech titled "Leadership in Modern Business." The irony made her smile. The boy beside her, still stunned to be sitting next to her, finally spoke up. "Ma'am, I still can't believe you didn't say anything to him," he said softly. Evelyn glanced at him, amused. What would it change? He'd feel stupid, that's for sure. "Maybe," she said thoughtfully, "but embarrassment only lasts a moment. Reflection can last a lifetime." The elderly woman on her other side nodded approvingly. "That's true, dear. Some lessons are best learned in silence." Evelyn sipped her tea, her mind calm despite the earlier humiliation. In truth, she'd faced far worse. Investors who doubted her, executives who mocked her age, rivals who underestimated her. This was just another test of patience. But the cabin wasn't done testing her yet. From the front, a voice suddenly rose sharp and entitled. "Excuse me," Martin called out loudly, waving his hand to summon a flight attendant. "What's taking so long with my meal? I asked for the salmon 15 minutes ago." The attendant hurried over. "I'm so sorry, sir. We're just heating—" "Unbelievable," he snapped, cutting her off. "You people don't know how to run a proper airline." His words traveled down the aisle like poison. Several passengers exchanged annoyed glances. One man muttered, "Who does this guy think he is?" Another added, "I saw him kick that lady out earlier. Total jerk." Martin didn't notice. He leaned back, sighing dramatically, as though the universe existed to inconvenience him. In the galley, the purser whispered to her team, "That's it. I've had enough of his attitude." "And do you know who that woman was that he kicked out?" The junior attendant nodded. "Evelyn Monroe, the CEO." The purser's eyes widened. "Are you serious?" "Completely. I recognized her when she walked on." The purser's jaw tightened. "We'll handle this discreetly. But after we land, I'm reporting this incident." The attendants nodded firmly. Their quiet loyalty to Evelyn, earned, not demanded, began to show in subtle ways. Her tea was always fresh, her comfort ensured. They checked on her often, addressing her respectfully, but never making a scene. Martin, on the other hand, found his requests met with perfectly polite efficiency. No extra smiles, no warmth. It didn't escape his notice. "Service used to be better on this airline," he muttered under his breath. Evelyn heard it from her seat and couldn't help but smile faintly. If only he knew. Halfway through the flight, the crew began serving meals to economy. Evelyn's tray arrived grilled chicken, fresh bread, and a small fruit bowl. She thanked the attendant with genuine warmth. "Ma'am," the attendant whispered shyly, "I just wanted to say, it's an honor having you on board." Evelyn smiled softly. "Thank you. And please don't treat me differently. I'm just another passenger today." The woman nodded, but her admiration lingered in her eyes. Meanwhile, in business class, Martin continued to make himself unforgettable, but not in the way he imagined. When a small turbulence bump jostled his glass, A few drops of champagne splashed onto his cuff. Ridiculous. He snapped. Can't even keep a steady flight path? The man beside him frowned. You do realize turbulence isn't their fault, right? Martin turned, annoyed. Excuse me? I said maybe relax. Everyone's trying their best. Martin's lips tightened. I don't need advice from strangers. The other man raised his eyebrows and turned away, shaking his head. Further back, the murmurs about Evelyn's identity began spreading. A couple of attendants quietly confirmed to curious passengers who the woman in row 17 really was. Each whisper passed like wildfire, traveling from seat to seat. The realization sparked wide eyes and stunned expressions. She's the owner? One woman whispered. The same one who got kicked out of her seat? Another gasped. Oh, that guy's in for it. Evelyn overheard fragments, but didn't intervene. She simply focused on the clouds drifting outside her window, her expression peaceful. As the whispers spread, so did subtle shifts in attitude. Passengers began treating her differently, not because of her title, but because they suddenly saw the depth of her restraint. She had been humiliated in front of them all, yet had shown more dignity than the man who thought he was important. 2 hours later, the captain's voice came through the intercom. Ladies and gentlemen, this is your captain speaking. We've reached our cruising altitude of 36,000 feet. Weather looks clear ahead, and we're expecting an on-time arrival in New York. Applause rippled softly through the cabin. Evelyn smiled and leaned back, stretching slightly. But up front, Martin rolled his eyes. They act like landing on time is some great achievement, he muttered. The attendant beside him couldn't help but respond, her tone professional, yet edged with calm authority. Sir, we take pride in every safe, timely flight. That's what makes Monroe Air special. Martin scoffed. Well, tell your CEO she should focus more on training staff properly instead of patting herself on the back. The attendant froze for half a second, forcing a smile. I'll make sure she hears that, she said evenly, walking away before laughter could escape her lips. By now, nearly the entire plane knew the truth. Only Martin remained blissfully unaware, comfortably cocooned in his arrogance. The boy next to Evelyn whispered, It's spreading. Everyone knows. Evelyn chuckled quietly. Let's hope they don't tell him just yet. Why not? Because sometimes, she said, her voice calm, people need to crash into their own reflection before they see it clearly. The rest of the flight was a slow build of irony. Passengers stole glances at Martin, whispering and shaking their heads. Even first-class guests had caught the story through the grapevine. Every attendant now served Evelyn with quiet reverence, but she never let it inflate her ego. When the lights dimmed for rest, Evelyn closed her eyes, content in silence. But in the back of her mind, she knew the moment of truth was coming. Sooner or later, the arrogant passenger in 3A would discover that the woman he'd scolded, insulted, and dismissed as not belonging was the very one who owned the airline he so proudly criticized. And when that moment came, Evelyn wouldn't need anger, revenge, or grand gestures, just truth. Because truth, she knew, had wings of its own. The soft chime of the intercom broke the quiet hum of the aircraft. Lights dimmed to a warm golden glow as the cabin settled into calm. Passengers read, dozed, or watched movies. But tension, invisible yet alive, floated between row 3 and row 17. Evelyn Monroe gazed out her window, her mind lost in thought. The city lights far below blinked faintly like scattered stars, and for a moment she wondered how many of those lights belonged to people chasing dreams the way she once had. Her journey hadn't been easy. From a small-town girl working 2 jobs to the CEO of Monroe Air, she had built her empire with patience, grit, and unshakable faith. And tonight, All that she'd learned about dignity was being tested by one arrogant man who thought a seat defined status. The boy beside her, still awake, whispered, "Do you ever get mad, ma'am?" "You just stay calm." Evelyn smiled faintly. "Anger is easy. Grace takes work." He nodded thoughtfully. "My mom says the same thing. She says kindness is power." "She's right," Evelyn said warmly. "Never forget that." Up in business class, Martin Keller was busy typing furiously on his laptop. His email to customer service read like a royal complaint letter. Subject: extremely poor service experience on Monroe Air Flight 748. To whom it may concern, I am utterly disappointed by the lack of professionalism aboard your airline. Your staff is inattentive, slow, and untrained. Even worse, I had to give up my seat because of poor management. I strongly suggest your CEO rethinks how she runs this company. He hit send with a smirk, proud of his words. "Maybe this will shake them up," he muttered. A flight attendant passing by caught his words and bit her lip to keep from smiling. She knew that email would land in Evelyn Monroe's inbox the moment they touched down. At the rear galley, two attendants exchanged quiet whispers. "Do we tell him?" The purser shook her head. "Not yet. Let's wait until landing. The captain wants to handle it himself, but he's going to explode when he finds out. Then let him. Some lessons come best when the world stops to watch." The attendants shared a knowing glance. Meanwhile, Evelyn had drifted into light sleep, her head resting gently on the headrest. Her calm breathing stood in contrast to the restless arrogance just a few rows ahead. A small smile formed on her lips, not of pride, but of peace. She had learned long ago that power didn't come from control. It came from restraint. Hours later, the plane began its slow descent toward New York. The captain's calm voice echoed through the cabin. "Ladies and gentlemen, we'll be landing shortly. Please fasten your seatbelts and prepare for arrival." Lights brightened, window shades lifted, and conversations stirred to life. Passengers stretched, packed away books, and exchanged sleepy smiles. In row 3A, Martin pressed the service button again. "Excuse me," he said as the purser approached. "Could you have someone from management meet me when we land? I need to discuss my complaint in person." The purser's lips twitched slightly. "Of course, sir. Someone very senior will meet you at the gate." Martin smirked. "Good. I hope your CEO's free. I have a few things she needs to hear." The purser turned away quickly before her grin could escape. "Oh, she'll hear them," she murmured under her breath. As the aircraft descended through a sea of glowing clouds, Evelyn looked down at Manhattan's glittering skyline. The city was a beacon of ambition, a place that had tested her, shaped her, and finally crowned her success. She felt a quiet surge of pride. Beside her, the boy spoke softly. "Are you nervous about landing?" Evelyn smiled. "Not at all. But someone up there might be soon." The wheels touched down with a soft thud, and applause filled the cabin. The captain's voice followed. "Welcome to New York, ladies and gentlemen. On behalf of Monroe Air and our entire crew, we thank you for flying with us." The name hung in the air, Monroe Air. Some passengers turned toward Evelyn's row, unable to hide their excitement. The whispers began again, louder this time. "That's her. She's the CEO. Wait until that guy finds out." Martin, oblivious, was still scrolling through his phone. "Finally," he muttered. "Let's see if they managed to deplane properly this time." As the plane taxied to the gate, the purser received a call from the cockpit. She nodded, then made a calm announcement. "Ladies and gentlemen, please remain seated for a brief moment. We have a company protocol visit before deplaning." Murmurs rippled through the cabin. Evelyn smiled faintly. She knew what was coming. A few minutes later, as the seatbelt sign went off, A tall man in a navy suit boarded through the front door, the operations director of Monroe Air, Mr. David Hensley. His polished shoes and confident stride turned heads immediately. He greeted the captain, exchanged a few quiet words, and then looked toward row 17. His respectful nod said everything. Evelyn rose slowly, adjusting her blazer, and the cabin fell silent. Martin glanced up, confused. "What's going on?" As Evelyn stepped into the aisle, passengers leaned aside, giving her space like waves parting before a tide. She walked gracefully toward the front, every eye following. When she reached row 3A, Martin frowned, recognizing her instantly. "Oh, it's you. The woman from earlier. Are you here to wait? How did you even get up here?" Evelyn's expression was calm but firm. "Good evening, Mr. Keller." He blinked. "How do you know my name?" "Because," she said, voice steady as glass, "you sent me an email." His confusion deepened. "What are you talking about?" Evelyn glanced toward David, who handed her a tablet. She opened it and turned the screen toward him. Displayed was his freshly sent complaint timestamped and addressed directly to Evelyn Monroe, CEO, Monroe Air. Martin's eyes widened, his face draining of color. "Wait, why, you're—" Evelyn nodded once. "Yes, I'm the CEO of Monroe Air, and the passenger you humiliated before takeoff." The entire cabin erupted in gasps and whispers. Phones subtly lifted to capture the moment. Martin opened his mouth, stammering. I didn't know if I'd known." Evelyn raised a hand gently. "That's exactly the point, Mr. Keller. Respect shouldn't depend on who someone is. It should depend on who you are." Her words landed with the weight of truth. Even the flight attendants stood frozen, their pride for her glowing in their eyes. Martin's arrogance melted into shame. "Ma'am, please, I was just frustrated." "I didn't mean," Evelyn interrupted softly. "We all have bad days. But remember, how we treat people when no one's watching defines us more than any title or seat ever could." The silence that followed was absolute. Passengers looked at her with awesome, even clapping softly. Evelyn gave a humble smile and nodded toward the purser. "Please, continue deplaning procedures." She turned to walk back toward the exit, her composure unbroken, her dignity shining brighter than the city outside. As she reached the door, the boy from economy appeared with his mother, eyes wide. "Ma'am," he whispered. "That was amazing." Evelyn smiled. "Never forget what your mother told you. Kindness is power." The boy grinned proudly. Martin, still in his seat, looked down in silence, face red with embarrassment. As Evelyn stepped off the plane, David walked beside her and whispered, "You could have embarrassed him more." She shook her head. "No, I didn't need to. The truth already did." And as the doors closed behind her, the passengers inside erupted in applause, not for a CEO, not for wealth, but for the woman who reminded them what grace truly looked like. The air inside the terminal felt cooler, cleaner, yet for Martin Keller, it was suddenly suffocating. The passengers' applause still echoed in his head like a thunderclap that refused to fade. As Evelyn Monroe disappeared through the VIP exit with her team, Martin sat frozen in his seat, staring at the floor, replaying every arrogant word he'd spoken on that flight. The crew began clearing the cabin, but there was a hush among them. A silence that wasn't born of fear, but of awe. The captain, a man in his 50s with calm eyes and a deep respect for Evelyn, stepped out of the cockpit and addressed the staff softly. "Let's give Ms. Monroe a few minutes before we brief her for the next flight," he said. Then, glancing at Martin still seated near the window, he added quietly, "And someone should check if that gentleman's ready to leave. Though I imagine he's got a lot to think about." As the attendants nodded, the captain walked down the jet bridge to where Evelyn stood waiting with her assistant, Amelia. "Miss Monroe," he said respectfully, tipping his cap. "That was remarkable. I've flown for 20 years, but I've never seen anyone handle a situation like that." Evelyn smiled softly. "Thank you, Captain. I didn't want to embarrass him. I just wanted to remind everyone watching that kindness isn't weakness." The captain nodded thoughtfully. "If more leaders thought like you, the skies would be gentler places." Evelyn chuckled. "Maybe one day, Captain. Maybe one day." Meanwhile, Martin finally stood up, his face pale. The plane was nearly empty now, but a few lingering passengers eyed him curiously as they passed. A woman muttered under her breath, "That's the guy who yelled at her." He caught the words, wincing. For the first time, shame felt heavier than his expensive luggage. He exited the aircraft, but instead of walking through the normal gate, he lingered by the corridor, half hoping no one would notice him. But fate, as always, had its own plans. At that very moment, a reporter from a small online travel blog, who had been one of the passengers in economy, spotted him. She held her phone discreetly, but ready, the red record light blinking faintly. "Excuse me," she said, stepping closer. "You were on that flight, weren't you?" Martin's nerves twitched. I was, yes. Why?" She tilted her head. "You had some kind of disagreement with Miss Monroe?" "I don't see how that's any of your business," he snapped, his tone flaring again before he caught himself. The reporter smiled knowingly. "Interesting. Because the internet's already buzzing about it." She raised her phone slightly. "You might want to check your name online." Martin frowned, pulling out his phone. The moment he opened his social feed, his heart sank. The hashtag the seat incident was already trending. Clips from other passengers' phones flooded his timeline, his own angry face arguing with Evelyn, his insults echoing, and then the moment she calmly revealed who she was. The comments were merciless. Arrogance meets karma at 30,000 feet. Never mess with the boss, especially when she owns the plane. Evelyn Monroe, CEO goals. Grace under pressure. Martin scrolled faster, his palms sweating. He could feel eyes on him even as he stood still, like invisible fingers pointing, whispering. He hurried away, ducking into the nearest restroom. Inside, he splashed water on his face and gripped the sink tightly. "What have I done?" he whispered to his reflection. The man who looked back wasn't confident anymore. He was small, desperate, and painfully human. Meanwhile, Evelyn sat quietly in the VIP lounge, a cup of herbal tea in her hands. Amelia, her assistant, leaned closer, showing her phone. "It's everywhere," she said gently. "Every news outlet's covering it. Some are calling it the flight of humility." Evelyn sighed. "I didn't want it to go public." "I know," Amelia said. "But people needed to see it. You didn't humiliate him. You showed grace. And that's what they're admiring." Evelyn looked out the window at the runway lights stretching into the horizon. "Grace," she repeated softly. Funny how the smallest moments teach the biggest lessons. Back in the terminal, Martin sat in a corner cafe, staring blankly at his untouched coffee. His phone buzzed constantly, emails from colleagues, messages from friends, and even a call from his company's PR head. "Martin," the voice on the other end said urgently, "we need to do damage control. This story's everywhere. People are calling for your resignation." He closed his eyes. "I didn't mean for any of this. I just acted like you owned the world." The voice cut in. "Well, apparently someone else actually did." Martin had no defense. He just sat there in silence. An hour later, the terminal began to clear. Evelyn rose to leave. Before she reached the exit, she saw Martin through the glass wall, slumped at the table, alone. Her steps slowed. For a moment, she considered walking past, letting him drown in his own embarrassment. But then, Something inside her shifted. She turned to Amelia. "Wait for me outside." Amelia looked surprised. "You're not going to?" Evelyn smiled faintly. "Just a quick word." She walked over to the cafe. The clack of her heels made Martin look up, his expression instantly tightening into guilt. "Miss Monroe," he started, standing quickly. Evelyn raised a hand gently. "Sit down, Mr. Keller." He obeyed immediately. "I don't expect forgiveness," he said quickly. "I was wrong. I let my temper, my pride—" Evelyn stopped him with a kind smile. "I know. But that's not what I came to say." She pulled a card from her coat and placed it on the table. "That's my direct office line. Tomorrow morning, I want you to meet with our team." He blinked in disbelief. "You're not firing me?" Evelyn shook her head. "You're not even my employee." "Oh, right." He exhaled. "But I have an opening," she continued. "Corporate behavior training, teaching executives how to handle high-pressure interactions with empathy." Martin looked stunned. "You're offering me a job?" Evelyn smiled. "I'm offering you a second chance. Use this moment to teach others what arrogance can cost and what humility can save." For the first time that day, Martin's eyes softened. "You'd really trust me to do that?" "I don't need to trust you yet," she said calmly. "You'll earn it." He nodded slowly, emotion rising in his throat. "Thank you, Miss Monroe. I don't deserve this." Evelyn stood. "Maybe not. But grace isn't given because we deserve it. It's given because we need it." With that, she left him sitting in silence, the card gleaming under the soft cafe light like a lifeline. Outside, Amelia looked at her questioningly. "You gave him another chance?" Evelyn smiled gently. "Everyone deserves one. Even the arrogant ones. Especially them." As they stepped into the night air, the city roared around them. Lights, horns, and life. The incident that had started as a humiliation had turned into a lesson for thousands watching online. And though Evelyn never posted a word, her quiet grace spoke louder than any headline ever could. By morning, the world had changed, at least for Martin Keller. He woke up to a flood of messages, his phone buzzing like a trapped bee. His name was everywhere, splashed across headlines and social media feeds. Businessman humiliates airline owner mid-flight, gets a lesson in humility. Karma at cruising altitude, the woman who owned the seat and the sky. Videos of the confrontation had gone viral overnight. Millions had watched as Martin's arrogance crumbled in front of Evelyn Monroe's quiet composure. Some laughed, others criticized, but most praised Evelyn, her restraint, her class, her refusal to humiliate him even when she had every right. Meanwhile, Evelyn sat in her office at Monroe Air headquarters, a sleek glass building overlooking the New York skyline. The morning light reflected off the walls, painting everything in silver warmth. Her assistant, Amelia, scrolled through the trending feed. "Over 8 million views since midnight," she said softly. "You're on every news channel, every blog, even morning talk shows." Evelyn didn't look up from her laptop. "They'll move on soon." "They always do." Amelia smiled faintly. "Not this time. People are calling you the Queen of the Skies. They're saying your grace reminded them of what leadership should look like." Evelyn finally looked up, setting her pen down. "Grace isn't leadership. It's survival." Amelia tilted her head. "You really think so?" Evelyn leaned back, gazing out the window. In a world that celebrates noise, staying calm takes courage. And that courage is what keeps people listening. Her words lingered in the room like quiet truth. Just then, her phone buzzed, a call from public relations. She answered. "Evelyn, the networks are requesting interviews. CNN, NBC, even a couple of international outlets." She sighed softly. Decline them all. The story's not about me. But it is about you, the voice insisted. You handled it perfectly. Then let that be the story, she interrupted. A lesson, not a spotlight. When she hung up, Amelia grinned. You really are impossible to market. Evelyn smiled. Good, I'm not for sale. Down the street, Martin stood outside Monroe Air's headquarters, the winter wind biting through his coat. He had spent the night replaying every word Evelyn had said. Respect shouldn't depend on who someone is. It should depend on who you are. Those words haunted him, echoing louder than any headline. He walked into the building nervously, clutching the business card she'd given him. The receptionist greeted him warmly. Good morning, Mr. Keller. Miss Monroe is expecting you. That simple sentence hit harder than he expected. She's expecting me. He followed an assistant through a corridor lined with framed photographs, Monroe Air's history, milestones, aircrafts, and employees. But what caught his attention most was a large picture of Evelyn at 23, standing in front of her first plane, smiling with oil stains on her hands. The caption read, Dream it, build it, fly it. He stopped, staring at the photo. The woman in it didn't look like a CEO. She looked like someone who had built her empire with her own two hands. The kind of person he used to mock for working too hard. When he finally reached her office, Evelyn stood by the window, watching planes take off from the distant airport. Good morning, Mr. Keller, she said without turning. Good morning, he managed, his voice low. Coffee? She offered, gesturing to the tray on her desk. He shook his head. No, thank you. She poured herself a cup. You didn't sleep, did you? He hesitated. No, she nodded. Neither did I, but for different reasons, I think. He took a seat quietly as she turned to face him. The sunlight behind her made her silhouette sharp, like a figure carved from strength itself. You said yesterday you wanted to make amends, she began. Yes, he said quickly. I meant it. I was wrong, Miss Monroe. Completely wrong. I know, she said simply. But admitting it isn't the same as understanding it. He frowned slightly. What do you mean? She set her cup down and leaned forward. Do you know why arrogance spreads so easily, Mr. Keller? He shook his head. Because it hides fear, she said. Fear of being small, of being ignored, of being less important than someone else. People like you, like me, even sometimes use pride as armor. But eventually, it cracks. Martin looked down, her words cutting straight through him. I was trying to prove I mattered, he admitted. All my life, that's what I've done. Evelyn nodded gently. And did it work? He sighed. Not for long. She stood, walking toward the large photo wall, a timeline of Monroe Air's history. I built this airline from nothing. I was laughed at, underestimated, dismissed. I learned the hard way that arrogance never builds. It only destroys. What you did on that flight wasn't just rude. It was a symptom of something you haven't faced yet. He swallowed hard. And what's that? She turned to him with calm eyes. You've forgotten how to listen. The silence between them was thick, but not hostile. It was the kind of silence that held a mirror. Then Evelyn softened. But you have a chance to change that. You told me once you run a leadership consultancy, right? Yes, he said, surprised. I mean, I did, after. Well, after this, I'm not sure. Evelyn smiled slightly. Then let's make sure it means something. I want you to design a training module, Empathy in Corporate Culture. You'll lead it. And we'll start by presenting it to Monroe Air's management. His eyes widened. You want me to teach your team after what I did? I want you to teach them because of what you did, she replied. Real lessons come from real mistakes. For a moment, he couldn't speak. Gratitude and disbelief mixed in his chest until all he could do was nod. "I won't let you down," he said finally. Evelyn smiled faintly. "You already did. Now just make it right." When Martin left the building an hour later, his heart felt strangely light. Not forgiven, not yet, but awakened. That afternoon, Monroe Air released an official statement. "At Monroe Air, we believe dignity belongs to every passenger." Yesterday's events serve as a reminder that respect transcends rank or title. We thank our staff and passengers for upholding our values of compassion, patience, and humility. The statement didn't mention names. It didn't need to. The message spoke for itself. By evening, #Evelyn Monroe was trending again, not for her wealth, not for the confrontation, but for her quiet refusal to retaliate. Talk shows called her the leader the world needs. Columnists wrote about the Monroe Method, a new model of corporate grace under fire. And somewhere in a quiet corner of New York, Martin watched it all unfold. He wasn't angry nor humiliated this time. He simply felt thankful. Thankful that life had finally shown him the truth at 30,000 feet. That altitude meant nothing without attitude. He picked up his phone and typed a public post. "Yesterday, I learned more about leadership from the woman I disrespected than in my entire career. To Miss Evelyn Monroe, thank you for your grace. You didn't just own the airline. You owned the moment." Within hours, his post went viral too, not for shame this time, but for humility. And far above, another Monroe Air flight soared through the clouds, calm, steady, graceful, just like the woman who built it. The plane began its slow descent toward New York, the skyline emerging in the soft blush of dawn. A golden hue spread across the cabin, touching faces weary from the long flight. But one person sat frozen in his seat, Martin Keller. His earlier smugness had vanished, replaced by a hollow stillness. The magazine article with Evelyn Monroe's face on the cover lay on his lap, the headline screaming at him like an accusation. Evelyn Monroe, the billionaire behind Monroe Air. Martin's thoughts were chaotic, crashing into each other like waves in a storm. He replayed every word he had said to her, the mocking tone, the smirk, the way he had demanded her seat, as if she were beneath him. His stomach twisted. For the first time, he felt truly small. Meanwhile, Evelyn sat peacefully a few rows ahead, sipping tea brought by a nervous flight attendant who now seemed desperate to make amends. Her demeanor hadn't changed. She remained composed, her quiet elegance commanding respect without needing to demand it. She hadn't mentioned her title, hadn't exposed him in anger. She had simply let the truth reveal itself, naturally, gracefully. As the plane tilted slightly, the captain's voice came over the intercom. "Ladies and gentlemen, we are beginning our descent into John F. Kennedy International Airport. Current weather is clear, with an arrival time of 7:32 a.m. On behalf of Monroe Air, thank you for flying with us." The words, "on behalf of Monroe Air," hung heavily in the air for Martin. It was no longer just an airline. It was her airline. Every inch of the plane, every logo, every service policy, all of it carried her signature, her leadership. He'd insulted the woman who made his comfort possible. Passengers around him stole glances, some shaking their heads. They had seen everything. Many had watched Evelyn being asked to move earlier in the flight, and now, realizing who she was, they whispered in disbelief. Some even smiled faintly, not in mockery, but in admiration for her calm dignity. A soft chime sounded as the seatbelt sign lit up. The attendants prepared for landing, and the cabin filled with the quiet rustle of passengers organizing their belongings. Evelyn folded her tablet neatly and placed it in her bag. The same attendant who had once asked her to move now approached her timidly. "Miss Monroe," she said softly, "we're deeply sorry about earlier." Evelyn smiled, her tone gentle. "Don't worry. Mistakes happen. The attendant looked visibly relieved, but added, "The captain has requested that you disembark first, as per standard courtesy." Evelyn nodded. "That's very kind." The plane touched down with a soft thud, tires screeching briefly against the runway before slowing to a smooth taxi. The passengers applauded lightly, a tradition that somehow felt more meaningful this time. When the seatbelt light blinked off, everyone began to stand, stretching and gathering their things. But the front row remained still, waiting. "Ladies and gentlemen," the purser announced over the cabin speakers, "we kindly request that all passengers allow Miss Evelyn Monroe, CEO of Monroe Air, to disembark first. Thank you for your patience." A hush fell across the cabin. Heads turned again. Martin sank deeper into his seat, his face burning. He avoided eye contact, gripping his armrest tightly. Evelyn stood slowly, her poise unshaken. She thanked the crew, shaking hands with the captain and smiling at the attendants, who now looked at her like she was royalty. The atmosphere had shifted completely. She wasn't just a passenger anymore. She was a symbol of humility, grace, and quiet power. As she stepped into the aisle, her gaze met Martin's. He looked up, eyes filled with guilt and disbelief. He opened his mouth, perhaps to apologize, but no words came out. Evelyn stopped briefly beside him, studying him for a moment. The entire cabin seemed to hold its breath. Her voice was calm, almost kind, but carried the weight of truth. "Next time," she said softly, "kindness will take you further than money." It wasn't harsh. It wasn't vengeful. But it struck him harder than any insult could. Her tone carried wisdom, the kind that came from experience, not authority. Then she gave him a faint smile, turned, and walked away. Martin sat frozen as she disappeared toward the exit. Around him, passengers exchanged quiet murmurs. A few even clapped softly, a gesture of respect toward her, and perhaps a small lesson for him. The businessman who had strutted down the jet bridge hours earlier, as if he owned the world, now sat still, the echo of her words circling in his mind like an endless loop. Kindness will take you further than money. When the rest of the passengers began disembarking, Martin moved slowly, avoiding the curious stares. As he reached the exit, the captain stood there, shaking hands with passengers. When Martin passed, the captain gave him a long look, not angry, but disappointed, before turning to thank the next traveler. Outside, the terminal buzzed with early morning life. The smell of coffee filled the air, and sunlight streamed through tall glass windows. Evelyn stood near the VIP exit, greeted by her assistant and 2 security personnel. Cameras clicked discreetly. Word had already begun to spread. Martin lingered at a distance, watching her speak warmly with her staff. She looked so effortless, so human. He had judged her clothing, her simplicity, her silence, never realizing that confidence doesn't need to shout. He wanted to approach, to apologize. But how could he? What could he possibly say that wouldn't sound hollow? She had already forgiven him in her own way, not with words, but with grace. Later that morning, as Martin waited for his baggage, his phone buzzed. A message from his assistant read, "Sir, you might want to check the news." He opened the link. There it was, a video clip already going viral on social media. Someone had recorded the confrontation, from his arrogant demand for her seat to the final revelation of her identity. The caption read, "Passenger insults airline owner mid-flight. Her response wins the internet." Comments flooded the post. She handled it with class. That's what real power looks like. Imagine being that guy right now. His face wasn't shown clearly, but those who'd been on the flight knew. The humiliation was complete. But beneath his embarrassment, something else stirred, reflection. He thought about his life, the endless need to feel superior, to control, to dominate. He'd always equated success with power, not kindness. But Evelyn had proven the opposite in a single flight. She hadn't needed to prove her worth. She simply was. As he stepped outside into the New York morning, the city noise felt strangely distant. For once, Martin didn't feel like barking orders or demanding attention. He felt quiet. Evelyn's words replayed again, steady and unshakable. Kindness will take you further than money. That day, as his car pulled up, he made a silent promise to himself to change, to listen more, to lead differently. Because true power, he realized, wasn't about seats or status. It was about how you treat people when no one's watching. And somewhere above, another Monroe Air flight took off into the rising sun, carrying Evelyn Monroe, the woman who reminded the world that humility always flies first class. By the evening, the story had spread like wildfire. Social media feeds overflowed with clips, screenshots, and commentary about Evelyn Monroe and the infamous flight. Hashtags like Monroe Air Grace and Seat of Humility dominated trending topics worldwide. Even late-night talk shows ran segments dissecting the incident, praising her composure and leadership. Inside her office at Monroe Air headquarters, Evelyn sat quietly, reviewing the day's coverage. Amelia, her assistant, hovered nervously nearby. "It's a lot," she said. "Millions have seen it. Everyone is talking about you." Evelyn took a slow sip of tea. "It's not about me," she said softly. "It's about what happened in that cabin. The lesson is what counts, not the headlines." "But they will make it about you?" Amelia pressed. "The way you handled him, everyone's calling it a masterclass in leadership. Even Forbes mentioned it." Evelyn smiled faintly. "Good. Let the lesson travel, not the ego." Meanwhile, Martin Keller had become something of a minor sensation himself, though not the kind he was used to. The man who had boasted about entitlement and status now faced global scrutiny. His inbox flooded with messages from colleagues, clients, and media outlets. Some mocked him. Some criticized him. Some even offered opportunities for redemption. For the first time in his life, Martin sat down and thought. Really thought. Not about climbing the corporate ladder, not about winning, not about appearances. He reflected on humility, empathy, and respect, concepts that had always seemed abstract until the moment. Evelyn Monroe had demonstrated them in a single interaction. The next morning, Martin entered Monroe Air headquarters, not to negotiate, not to demand, but to learn. Evelyn had scheduled a private session for him with her leadership training team. The program she offered wasn't punishment. It was a chance to transform arrogance into wisdom. He followed her into the conference room, still unsure how to behave. Evelyn waited patiently, standing by the window as the sun's rays highlighted her calm posture. "Mr. Keller," she began, "I don't need an apology. I need understanding." He swallowed hard. I understand. About respect. About how I acted. But I don't know how to unlearn arrogance." She smiled gently. "We start small. Every interaction, every choice, every word. Leadership is less about authority and more about influence, the kind that uplifts rather than diminishes." They spent hours reviewing scenarios, role-playing, and discussing past experiences. Martin began to see patterns in his behavior he had ignored: impatience, entitlement, lack of listening. He realized how often he had demanded respect instead of earning it. Meanwhile, across the country, news outlets ran feature stories on Evelyn's leadership style. Interviews with Monroe Air staff highlighted how she had built a company culture based on empathy, patience, and professionalism. Passengers from the flight shared their perspectives, many recounting how Evelyn's quiet strength had left them in awe. Social media exploded with supportive messages. If more CEOs acted like this, the world would be a better place. Watching her handle that passenger was humbling, literally and figuratively. Evelyn Monroe just gave a lesson we all needed in humanity. Even Martin's own social media post reflecting on his mistakes went viral, though with a tone of sincerity rather than embarrassment. He admitted publicly that he had learned a hard lesson, and many praised him for owning his mistakes. Proof that transformation is possible when guided by the right example. Weeks passed. Martin continued his leadership training, working closely with Monroe Air staff, and even speaking to other corporate teams about his experience. He shared the story of the flight, not to boast, but as a cautionary tale about pride and the power of grace. One afternoon, as Evelyn walked through the company hangar inspecting new planes, Martin approached her. He seemed calmer, more composed, a shadow of the arrogance he once wore like armor. "Ms. Monroe," he began, "I just wanted to say thank you, not just for the training, but for how you handled everything on the flight. It changed me." Evelyn studied him for a moment. She could see genuine humility in his posture, in the careful words he chose. "Thank you for taking the lesson seriously," she replied. "It's easy to hear a lesson, harder to act on it." He nodded. "I hope one day I can pass it on, not just to employees, but to everyone I work with." She smiled faintly. "Then you're already on the right path." By the end of the month, Monroe Air had become the subject of a case study in leadership programs worldwide. Universities analyzed Evelyn's actions, highlighting the interplay of calm authority, emotional intelligence, and humility. Videos of the incident were used to teach corporate ethics, conflict resolution, and customer relations. Back on the original flight path, passengers who had witnessed the incident told friends, family, and colleagues about what they had seen. The story spread organically, fueled by admiration rather than gossip. Evelyn's grace became a viral symbol, not because she demanded recognition, but because her actions spoke louder than words ever could. Even Martin found himself sharing the story at conferences, often pausing to emphasize that humility, empathy, and patience are the core traits of true leadership. He used his own mistake as a teaching point, proving that lessons learned in discomfort are the ones that endure. Evelyn, of course, continued to fly quietly above it all, inspecting flights, ensuring the well-being of passengers, mentoring staff, and occasionally glancing at social media with a small, private smile. She did not seek fame. She did not crave recognition. She simply lived her principles, proving that power and kindness need not be enemies. On a quiet morning, as she stood on the balcony of Monroe Air headquarters overlooking the runway, she watched planes taxi, lift, and glide into the clouds. A small smile curved her lips. She thought of the flight, the arrogant passenger, the whispers in the cabin, the lesson that had reached thousands. And she realized something. The moment wasn't hers. The lesson was. And in the end, that lesson would ripple farther than any wealth or title ever could. The final headline in the New York Times summarized the event succinctly. Passenger challenges airline CEO learns lesson in humility and grace at 30,000 feet. Evelyn Monroe didn't read it. She didn't need to. She had already seen the real impact in the transformation of Martin Keller, in the pride of her staff, in the hearts of passengers who witnessed the quiet power of dignity. The skies, as always, remained calm. And above it all, Evelyn Monroe continued to soar, proving that true leadership isn't about authority, money, or titles. It's about grace, courage, and the ability to teach without ever raising your voice. As the sun set behind the city skyline, a new flight took off, guided by the principles Evelyn had built into every inch of her airline. And for the passengers on that plane, perhaps one day, one small moment at 30,000 feet would remind them of a lesson that never fades. Kindness will always take you further than arrogance ever could. And somewhere in a quiet office, Martin Keller began the rest of his life humbled, wiser, and determined never to forget the lesson of the arrogant passenger and the CEO who simply owned her grace. The end.